Have you ever been put in front of a therapist before?
Interestingly enough, I tried a couple therapists when I was younger and in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't work out at
Okay.
all. I don't think I made it past 3 sessions.
The number one thing you have to remember is whoever you're going to work with, you have to be willing to be honest. Like, we can sit here and I can try to pull information out of you, but when you have that level of resistance, it can be very, very difficult to kind of know how to manage. But when you sit down with somebody and you feel like, man, it feels a little easier. I want to tell you more. That's the kind of person that there's probably a better chance that you're going to be successful with in going on that journey through. After all that stuff that you've gone through, have you ever been put in front of a therapist before?
Interestingly enough, I tried a couple therapists when I was younger and in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't work out at all.
Okay.
I don't think I made it past 3 sessions.
Wow. Do you know why?
I wasn't open to the experience. It's
Oh,
very
okay.
important, and also setting goals is very important. I just kind
Very
of
true.
was like, I have trauma, like fix it. Like I would just sit there, but I didn't want to talk about anything. I also think there was this idea of like I just didn't feel like I was connecting with them.
Which is totally fair, by the way. You don't connect with every therapist. That's why you have to try different people.
When I did try to be open with certain ones, I'd feel like I don't feel like they were specializing in what I needed, or that's where their experience was.
Got it.
Like when I was 17, so part of me repressing all my emotions for a while would come out as anger or frustration.
Which is normal.
Which would come out as like a sort of like panic attack or like anger burst, and I would result in like hitting things or like hitting my head. I would leave like bumps on my head and stuff when I was 17.
Self-injurious behavior.
When I told her that, she was like, "Oh, do this," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And that for some reason that frustrated me. Now that I'm like know more, I understand it's like a sensory thing, and that's what she was getting at. But at the time, I was like, she has no clue what she's talking about. I was like, no, she's like, she just doesn't have a clue. So, and then at one point, I remember this is the last therapist I tried in high school.
Okay.
She tried asking me about like why I thought these were happening, and I didn't want to talk to her about like much. So I actually closed the laptop on her. This is Zoom era. And I went and she called me on my phone and I didn't answer, and that's the last time I saw her. I don't even think I ever told my mom. She just didn't ask why I stopped going. She just never asked about why I stopped going to therapy.
So you just weren't you weren't feeling connected enough with that person that you wanted to go there and get into your stuff.
And then I had I went to a therapy session once I got into college. It was the first semester I got there, and I was in a really bad place. So I went to like the one the school provided. Yeah. And I went, and I remember I just like sat down, and the second I sat down, I started crying, like the whole time, like ugly crying, and he was just like looked so concerned. He was like, "Oh my god." And because I was just like oversharing so much, and also my head was in a really bad place at the time. So what I was saying wasn't exactly like nice stuff or normal stuff you expect to hear on the first session. And then I never went back to him because I walked all the way out to my car. Meanwhile, I'm walking past college students, right? And I sit down in my car, and there's mascara running down my face. He didn't tell me to wipe my mascara. At the time, that offended me. I was like,
you're like, hey, why you got me walking around looking like this?
Yeah, and also where I went to college, they had like a limited number of sessions they offer students, and then they kind of like
they want you to go find another provider.
They give you like references and stuff like that, but they have you find somebody else, and I didn't want to open up to somebody to have to find somebody else.
That's part of the journey, I know.
So, interestingly enough, I'm in therapy now.
Good.
I started that in August.
Of last year? Okay.
So it's been very consistent, and I absolutely love her. She's perfect. No, she has a very casual style, which is something I personally appreciate. I don't think I've ever cried during a session just because we just talk about things. Like, she doesn't make it super heavy. She's not super focused on my past, which is something I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because for me, I don't need to sit there and focus on like what happened. Like, I need to I try to focus on like what's not working in my life now.
Agreed.
And also, I am a psychology student, so after doing an internship at a private practice and actually talking to therapists, like, I would obviously listen to what they had to say in the sense of like me trying to learn for my career, but sometimes when I heard them say like, oh, you need goals and you need, like, I finally understood how it was supposed to be structured and what I needed to do on my end.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
Another big thing in that at the first session that really opened me up to the experience is that she told me a little bit about her background and what she works with, and she's actually specializes in substance abuse, and she works at an inpatient facility. And she said that in the sense that she was like, there's not a lot I haven't seen or worked with or heard, and for me it just felt like this is someone who actually has a good understanding of like how I grew up and what I was around, because I was around a lot of people who suffered with substance abuse.
Yeah.
Not just my sibling, but other family members, cousin, aunts, uncles, people I was seeing, things like that.
Yeah, man, that stuff is heavy. I want to take a second and dissect a little bit more what you said, particularly about from the therapy perspective, because I get a lot of first timers, particularly the men. Most of them have never been with a provider before. So one thing I like to point out is the idea that you may have to talk to different people because you might not connect with each one. The number one thing you have to remember is whoever you're going to work with, you have to be willing to be honest. Like, we can sit here and I can try to pull information out of you, but when you have that level of resistance, you know, it can be very, very difficult to kind of know how to manage. But when you sit down with somebody and you feel like, man, it feels a little easier. I want to tell you more. That's the kind of person that there's probably a better chance that you're going to be successful with and going on that journey through. That's number one. But in addition to that, when you talked about how sometimes you might sit down like you did with the college provider and you just let everything out, what I was thinking when you made that comment was you were bursting at the seams ready to tell somebody and you couldn't hold it in anymore. And I've seen it. Number one, I've been that person and I've seen it. Because when you repress everything, I usually give a couple examples. It's like a raging volcano, or it's like if you ever take a soda and you shake it up and you take the top off, what happens? It explodes out, right? That's like our emotions. When you repress it, it's like you've been shaking up that bottle for a really, really long time. Eventually, it's going to come out, and it can manifest in a few different ways. It can come out in anger. It could be you have a panic attack. It could be that you engage in self-harm or self-injurious behavior. Or you sit down and you just have a breakdown. You're just like, I can't hold this in anymore. And like the floodgates, emotional floodgates, they open. Either way, the important thing is that you sit down with somebody, particularly when you have the level of trauma that you said that you've experienced, because I will tell you, it absolutely impacts the way you see the world.
I agree with that.
So we have to unpack those things so that we can have better and healthier relationships with all different types of people as we get older, which is why I'm very happy you said that you are in therapy, because that's very, very important. Now, back to kind of like where you're at now. So when you talked about substance abuse, I actually used to work at a facility when I was in grad school for about a year. And I don't have a family history of that, so I didn't have my own personal experience to draw upon. So everything was new to me. And interestingly enough, that facility was predominantly a heroin substitute facility. So it was a methadone maintenance facility. But most people came in there off of heroin, but a lot of them were using prescribed opiates. That's how they started, from a doctor. So maybe car accident, maybe they had an accident at their house, something like that, got prescribed it, eventually got hooked. The prices were very high, heard about this thing called heroin, then started getting used to that because it was much cheaper, so on and so forth. You see a lot of very negative ramifications for those that end up going down that path. But my point is, when I said earlier about how a lot of people use substances to kind of avoid pain and things that they go through, because a lot of times we don't have like the verbiage, we don't have the vocabulary to actually express and articulate how we feel and what's going on and what we can do about it to actually resolve those concerns. So for those folks that don't have those resources, it's common for them to then engage in substance use. And what happens is, which is a very insidious cycle, when you start using it just to avoid maybe this one sad feeling like my dad's not here, and then next thing you know, I'm always going to come down, right? You go up, you feel better, and then you come back down. But then I have to go up again to keep running from the feeling, because the feeling is always waiting for me. That's how you create that cycle of dependency. Because every time you come down, I want to immediately go back up again. And then maybe you start experimenting, you're adding in new things. So it becomes even harder to kind of let that thing go and have the opportunity for healthier coping. Again, to give us more fulfilling life where we're not stuck or dependent on something, instead of learning how to manage these things on our own or with the help of an actual professional.